Once upon a time, in a quiet village surrounded by meadows and winding rivers, there lived a gentle young girl named Cinderella. Her heart was kind, her spirit patient, and her smile as warm as the sunlight that touched the village rooftops each morning. Yet, despite her goodness, her life was marked by hardship and sorrow. Cinderella's mother had passed away when she was still very young, leaving behind memories of tender care and words of comfort. Her father, seeking companionship, later married a woman with 2 daughters. At first, Cinderella hoped that this new family would bring harmony and love. She imagined laughter in the halls, shared meals filled with joy, and the warmth of sisterly affection. But soon, she discovered that her stepmother's heart was cold, and that her stepsisters were spoiled and unkind. Each day became a trial. Cinderella was given endless tasks, scrubbing the floors until they shone, tending the fire until her hands grew rough, and preparing every meal while her stepsisters rested in their fine gowns. While they admired their reflection in polished mirrors and adorned themselves with ribbons and pearls, Cinderella wore a single faded dress and shoes that were worn thin. Her only companions were the birds perched outside the window and the small creatures that scurried about the house, who seemed to sense her gentle spirit. Despite the cruelty she endured, Cinderella never allowed bitterness to enter her heart. She moved through her tasks with quiet grace, humming softly as she worked. Her songs carried a sweetness that filled even the most shadowed corners of the house, like a candle's glow pushing away darkness. To those who listened carefully, her voice was a reminder that kindness could survive even in the hardest places. One morning, the quiet rhythm of the village was broken by the sound of hooves and the gleam of royal banners. A messenger from the palace arrived, carrying a golden letter sealed with a bright ribbon. The king had declared that a grand ball would be held in honor of the prince, who wished to find a bride among the maidens of the land. Excitement spread like wildfire. In every home, mothers prepared their daughters, and seamstresses worked tirelessly on gowns. In Cinderella's household, the stepsisters squealed with delight at the thought of dancing in the palace halls. The stepmother, ever ambitious, encouraged their dreams, seeing the ball as a chance to secure wealth and influence. For Cinderella, the news stirred a longing deep in her heart. She imagined the palace lights glowing against the night sky, the music drifting through the air, and the chance for just one evening to step out of her life of labor and into a world of beauty. Yet her hopes were quickly dashed. The stepmother scorned the very idea that a girl in rags could attend such an event. Instead, she ordered Cinderella to stay behind, burdened with extra chores, while the others prepared for their evening of splendor. On the night of the ball, Cinderella assisted her stepsisters with quiet patience. She laced their gowns, adjusted their sashes, and brushed their hair until it gleamed, all without a word of complaint. When at last their carriage rolled away and the house fell silent, Cinderella sat alone by the fireplace. Her hands, weary from work, rested in her lap, and tears welled in her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to grieve the life denied to her. In that moment of despair, something extraordinary happened. A warm light filled the room, soft at first, then bright and shimmering, as though the stars themselves had descended into the house. Out of this light appeared a graceful woman, whose presence radiated comfort and wonder. She was no ordinary visitor, but a fairy godmother, drawn by the purity of Cinderella's heart. With a touch of her wand, the fairy godmother transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary. A humble pumpkin turned into a magnificent golden carriage. Small mice became elegant white horses. A lizard was shaped into a dignified coachman. Finally, with a final sweep of magic, Cinderella's rags were replaced by a gown of breathtaking beauty, shimmering with silver and blue. Upon her feet appeared glass slippers, delicate and radiant, reflecting the starlight like crystal. The fairy godmother's magic, however, came with a condition. When the clock struck midnight, the enchantment would fade, returning everything to its ordinary form. Grateful and filled with joy, Cinderella stepped into the carriage, her heart pounding with anticipation. The palace that evening glittered like a jewel. Candles lit the grand halls, music filled the air, and laughter echoed against marble walls. When Cinderella entered, a hush fell over the crowd. Her beauty and grace were unlike anything they had ever seen. Even her stepsisters, who did not recognize her, watched in awe. The prince himself, captivated at once, stepped forward to greet her. Together, they moved across the dance floor, their steps in perfect harmony, as though they had known each other all their lives. Time seemed to disappear as they danced beneath the chandeliers, surrounded by admiration and wonder. But time, relentless and unforgiving, soon caught up with her. As the first chime of midnight rang through the hall, Cinderella's joy turned to alarm. She fled from the palace, rushing down the grand staircase, her glass slippers striking the stone steps. In her haste, one slipper slipped from her foot, yet she dared not stop. By the time the 12th chime echoed, the magic vanished. The carriage returned to a pumpkin, the horses to mice, and the gown to the faded dress she wore each day. Only one slipper remained, glistening in her hand like proof of a dream. The next morning, the kingdom buzzed with excitement. The prince, determined to find the mysterious maiden, announced that he would marry the one whose foot fit the lost glass slipper. Messengers carried the delicate shoe across the land, visiting every household. At Cinderella's home, the stepsisters eagerly attempted to force their feet into the slipper, but no matter how they tried, it would not fit. Finally, Cinderella, quiet and unnoticed, stepped forward. To the shock of all, the slipper slid onto her foot, as though it had been made only for her. In that instant, her fairy godmother reappeared, and with another touch of her wand, Cinderella's rags transformed once again into the radiant gown of the ball. The truth could no longer be hidden. The prince, arriving soon after, recognized her at once. Joy lit his face, for he had found the girl who had captured his heart. With grace and serenity, Cinderella accepted the new chapter that awaited her. Her wedding was celebrated across the land, with feasts and music that echoed for days. Yet what made Cinderella's story truly remarkable was not the palace or the crown, but the spirit she carried with her. Even after she became a princess, she remained kind to those who had wronged her, offering forgiveness, rather than punishment. Her gentleness softened even the hearts of her stepsisters, who grew to respect her. And so, Cinderella's tale became one told from village to village, a story of patience, kindness, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, light can appear. She and the prince lived happily ever after, their love shining like the stars above the kingdom. Once upon a time, in a small village near the edge of a great forest, there lived a kind and gentle little girl. Because her grandmother had given her a beautiful red hood to wear, everyone in the village called her Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, her mother prepared a basket filled with fresh bread and sweet honey. She wanted her daughter to bring it to the grandmother, who was feeling unwell and lived in a little house deep inside the forest. Before the girl left, her mother gave her careful instructions. She must stay on the path, never wander into the woods, and never speak to strangers. Little Red Riding Hood promised to obey, and she happily set out on her journey. The path through the forest was calm and beautiful. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall trees. Birds sang cheerfully, and the sound of leaves crunching under her feet made the walk pleasant. But hidden among the shadows of the trees was a cunning and hungry wolf, watching the little girl with sharp eyes. The wolf longed for a meal, and when he saw the girl, he thought of a wicked plan. He decided not only to eat the girl, but also her grandmother. Instead of attacking right away, the wolf hurried down a shorter path, determined to reach the grandmother's house first. Meanwhile, Little Red Riding Hood, innocent and curious, noticed the flowers blooming along the way. She stepped off the path to pick a few, thinking her grandmother would be delighted to receive them. This small delay gave the wolf enough time to reach the little house with the red roof. At the house, the grandmother was resting in bed. The wolf entered quickly and swallowed her whole in a single gulp. Then he dressed in her clothes, pulled the nightcap over his head, and slipped under the covers, disguising himself as the old woman. Not long after, Little Red Riding Hood arrived at the house. As she stepped inside, she felt a strange silence and dimness. Something about her grandmother seemed unusual. The ears were unusually large, the eyes glowed strangely, and the mouth seemed far too wide. She grew uneasy, but before she could understand what was happening, the wolf leapt from the bed and swallowed her as well. With both the girl and the grandmother inside his belly, the wolf felt satisfied. He stretched out on the bed and soon fell into a deep, heavy sleep, snoring loudly. Luckily, a passing hunter heard the strange noises. Wondering what it might be, he stepped into the house. There he saw the wolf lying on the bed, his stomach swollen and round. The hunter quickly realized what must have happened. Instead of killing the wolf at once, he carefully cut open its belly. To his great relief, out came the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood, frightened but alive. Together, they filled the wolf's stomach with heavy stones and stitched it closed. When the wolf finally awoke and tried to escape, the stones weighed him down so much that he stumbled and collapsed, never to trouble the forest again. Little Red Riding Hood threw her arms around her grandmother, crying with both fear and joy. She understood at last how dangerous it had been to ignore her mother's advice. If she had stayed on the path and resisted the temptation to wander, the wolf would never have had the chance to harm her. From that day on, she promised herself to always be cautious, never stray from the safe road, and never trust strangers. And so, Little Red Riding Hood grew wiser. Her grandmother recovered in peace, and the forest returned to its bright, happy calm. Birds sang, sunlight danced on the leaves, and life was safe once more. And that is the end of the tale, carrying with it a lesson. Obedience and caution can protect us from great dangers. Once upon a time, in a quiet village by the edge of a deep green forest, there lived a little girl named Goldilocks. She was called that because of her beautiful golden hair that shimmered like sunlight. Goldilocks was a bright and curious girl who loved exploring nature. The flowers, the trees, and the tiny animals that lived among the leaves. One morning, when the sky was blue and the birds were singing sweetly, Goldilocks decided to take a walk in the forest. The air was cool and fresh, and the path beneath her feet was soft with fallen leaves. She walked deeper and deeper among the tall trees, enjoying the sound of the wind whispering through the branches. After some time, she realized she'd gone much farther than she'd ever been before. The forest grew quieter, and soon she came upon a small clearing. There, hidden among the trees, stood a little wooden cottage. Its windows sparkled in the sunlight, and smoke rose gently from the chimney. Goldilocks, full of curiosity, stepped closer. She knocked softly on the door, but no one answered. The house seemed peaceful and quiet. Goldilocks waited for a moment, then slowly pushed the door open. Inside, the cottage was warm and welcoming. Everything looked clean and well kept. On a table near the window, 3 bowls of porridge were placed. 1 large, 1 medium, and 1 small. The smell was delicious, and after her long walk, Goldilocks suddenly realized how hungry she was. She went closer to the table and looked at the bowls. The big ones seemed to belong to someone large, the middle one to someone smaller, and the tiny one, perhaps, to a child. The golden porridge inside steamed gently. Goldilocks hesitated for a moment, then took a little taste from each bowl. One was too hot, another was too cold, but the smallest one was just perfect, warm and comforting. Without meaning to, she finished it all. Feeling full and sleepy, Goldilocks looked around the cozy room. Nearby, there were 3 chairs arranged neatly by the fire. One was very big and strong, one was softer and medium-sized, and one was small and cute. Goldilocks decided to rest for a moment. She tried sitting on the big chair first, but it was too hard and heavy. Then she sat on the middle one, but it was too soft, and she sank too deeply into it. Finally, she tried the smallest chair. It felt just right, comfortable and snug. She smiled and leaned back happily. But suddenly, with a loud crack, the little chair broke beneath her. Goldilocks jumped up in surprise. She felt sorry and hoped nobody would be angry. Now even more tired, she noticed a small staircase and decided to look upstairs. The bedroom was simple but cozy. There were 3 neatly made beds, 1 large, 1 medium, and 1 small. Goldilocks climbed onto the big bed first, but it was far too hard. She then tried the middle bed, but it was too soft and bouncy. Finally, she lay down on the smallest bed. It felt perfect, warm, gentle, and comfortable. Within moments, her eyes began to close, and soon she fell fast asleep. While Goldilocks slept peacefully, the owners of the house were walking back through the forest. They were a family of 3 bears: Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and Baby Bear. The bears had gone out for a short walk while their porridge cooled, just as they did every morning. They were happy and calm, unaware that someone had entered their home. When they reached the cottage, Papa Bear opened the door. At once, he noticed that something was different. The air smelled strange, and things were slightly out of place. The bears went to the table and saw that their breakfast had been disturbed. The large bowl had been touched, the medium bowl had been moved, and the small bowl, well, it was completely empty. The bears were surprised. They looked around the room and soon saw that the chairs had also been used. The big chair was fine, the medium one was slightly wrinkled, and the small one had been broken into pieces. The bears were confused and a little worried. Someone had clearly been inside their home. Quietly, they walked upstairs. The room was still and peaceful. The large bed looked messy. The medium bed had its blanket folded strangely, and the smallest bed, oh, there was someone sleeping in it. There, under the soft blanket, lay a little girl with golden hair shining in the sunlight that came through the window. She looked calm and innocent, dreaming sweetly without knowing that 3 bears were standing around her bed. For a moment, the bears simply watched in surprise. Then, the sound of their footsteps must have reached her ears, because Goldilocks slowly began to wake up. She blinked, turned her head, and when she saw the 3 bears looking at her, her eyes went wide with shock. Frightened, she jumped out of the bed, ran down the stairs, and dashed out the door. Her feet carried her quickly through the forest path, past the tall trees and the rustling leaves. She didn't stop until she saw the familiar road that led to her own home. Once she was safely inside, she sat down and tried to calm her racing heart. Goldilocks thought about everything that had happened. She realized that she should never have gone into someone else's home without permission. It had been wrong to touch things that didn't belong to her, even if she hadn't meant any harm. From that day on, she promised herself to always respect others' belongings and to think carefully before acting out of curiosity. As for the 3 bears, they were kind and gentle. They didn't stay angry for long. They cleaned up the kitchen, fixed Baby Bear's chair, and made a new batch of porridge. Later that day, they sat together by the warm fire, happy to have their home peaceful again. The forest outside slowly grew quiet as the sun went down, and the soft golden light faded through the trees. Everything returned to normal, calm, safe, and full of the same gentle magic that always filled the forest. And so ends the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears, a story about curiosity, mistakes, and learning to respect others. Sometimes our adventures teach us lessons that help us grow. And just like Goldilocks, we all learn, sooner or later, that kindness and respect are what make every story end happily. The end.